So good evening and welcome to tonight's Borough Board meeting. I'm David Johnson. I'm the senior advisor to the Deputy Brooklyn Borough President, Ingrid P. Lewis Martin. She's not able to join us tonight, so I will be acting in her place. We have Savannah Purcell, who's the Director of External Boards and Executive Assistant to the Deputy Brooklyn Borough President. Also, we don't have a tent for Ms. Jaleesa S. Santiago from the Public Advocate's Office. We want to welcome her here too. And as I just spoke to her, she said she will be attending more Borough Board meetings. So feel free to introduce yourself to her, make her feel warm and welcome here at Brooklyn Borough Hall. You want to proceed with the agenda, right? All right. On the agenda tonight, we have a presentation by Public Bank NYC, Coalition for Public Banking for Public Good. So, Rana, please call the roll. We're moving forward, right? Oh, okay. Sorry. I got it. We want to welcome Julian Robinson. Mr. Robinson, please come to the podium and state your name and title for the record.
Hello, my name is Julian Robinson. I'm the Community Education Coordinator at New Economy Project. Before I get started, I just want to thank you all for being out here tonight. Special thank you to the Brooklyn Borough President's Office for convening the group, and thank you to Councilmember Cornegie and his office for inviting the Public Bank New York City Coalition to present on our campaign here tonight. We're really excited to work with the council member, and we're really excited to let you all know what our coalition has been up to over the past couple of months and what we hope to establish in New York City. I would like to invite some of my colleagues. We're going to go through the presentation part by part, but I would like to invite them to the podium right now to introduce themselves. But first, I work at New Economy Project. We are one of the members of the Public Bank New York City Coalition. We're an economic justice nonprofit based in New York City. We've been operating for close to 25 years now. And our mission is to fight the institutions and corporations that perpetuate inequality, poverty, and segregation, like many of our mainstream financial institutions, and to work with community groups citywide to establish new institutions grounded in cooperation, democracy, racial, economic, environmental justice, like a public bank for New York City.
Good evening. My name is Jamie Tyberg. I'm the Development Director with New York Communities for Change. I think many of you are familiar with my organization. I will just mention, because I think it's relevant to the folks in this room, that we have a history of supporting grassroots candidates that stand with struggling communities, that pledge to empower them, and we believe that public bank is perhaps the most powerful vehicle through which we can create the changes that we need in housing, in education, against police violence, for good jobs, and most importantly, ensuring that we leave this planet in a better condition than we found it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tausif Asan. I'm the Civic Engagement Coordinator at NYPIRG. We're the largest student-directed nonprofit organization in the entire state, and we organize public college students all over New York. We actually have a student with us tonight from Brooklyn College, who you will hear from later. And NYPIRG is a big supporter and member of this campaign because we really believe that a public bank is necessary to achieve justice in all the different areas that we're going to be talking about today, whether it's housing justice, financial justice, economic justice, or environmental justice.
All right, so first, what is Public Bank New York City? So our coalition is a broad-based group of over 30 community, workers' rights, environmental, and economic justice groups calling for the creation of a municipal public bank to use public money for the public good. And we're going to talk about that in a second. In addition to the groups that we have present here today, members also include Brooklyn Cooperative Federal Credit Union, the New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives, Chaya CDC out in Queens, South Bronx Unite in the Bronx, and many other groups citywide. And we are calling for a bank rooted in a lot of the values that my colleagues just mentioned. Racial, economic, and environmental justice, among others, that will fundamentally change the way that the city approaches local economic development. Our approach has a strong emphasis on community organizing, which we believe is essential to not only ensuring the campaign succeeds, but is also critical to ensuring we have a bank that is accountable to the New Yorkers of color, the immigrant New Yorkers, and the low-income New Yorkers that are often on the front lines of the many types of harm that we're going to discuss. As such, we prioritize base building and member-led groups in decision-making, outreach, and all levels of the campaign.
I'm sorry, I get vouch for this all the time, but you speak a little slow.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
apologies. So that is Public Bank New York City. We're going to have a short presentation, and our presentation should introduce you to the campaign and describe how the city currently banks. It will discuss how this implicates public money, and it's a lot of public money, describe the transformative potential for a public bank, and update you on our coalition and how you can support the effort going forward. So up here, we have a one-pager that we can send along afterwards about how the public bank works. But so currently, the way public banking, or the way banking works in New York City is we have, you can go to the next slide. New York City has a budget of about $93 billion. It's about the budget of a small state, and that comes in through revenue like tax income and other sources. And this is the basic budget breakdown we have right here. Money comes in through taxes and other sources. Money goes out, we spend it on public services. And we're here to talk about where it sits in between. And these funds are public money. They come from you, me, our neighbors. It sits in 30 designated banks. And all of these banks are private financial institutions. This is not by choice. New York City is required by state law to hold all of its municipal deposit in commercial banks like Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, etc. And again, we are entrusting our public money drawn from our neighborhoods and our communities to the very same private financial institutions that caused the global financial crisis, redline our communities, and cause many other harms to New Yorkers of color, immigrant New Yorkers, and low-income folks all throughout the city. So now I'm going to invite Jamie to come up and talk a little bit more about those harms.
Next slide, please. And I also just want to let y'all know that the yellow folder, either on your seat or on your table, has information about the coalition. So this map is a bit small, but if you can try to look, despite the Federal Community Reinvestment Act of 1977, which requires banks to equitably serve all communities with which they do business, there are no banks in certain zip codes that are predominantly black neighborhoods. These two maps are financial services in Flatbush and East New York, which demonstrate a common pattern of banks redlining low-income communities of color and causing extractive businesses like check cashiers to flourish, but no bank branches. Next slide. Now, these banks also invest in oil pipelines that fuel climate change and cause massive impacts to frontline communities here in New York City, which is a coastal city. I don't think I have to remind you folks who was most impacted during and after Hurricane Sandy. New York City, the entire city lost power except for the Goldman Sachs headquarters. And according to the recent Rainforest Action Network report, Chase, which is one of the city's top bankers, is now the world's #1 financier of the destructive fossil fuel industry. And now I'm going to invite the student, Karen Yu from Brooklyn College, who was born and raised here in Brooklyn, to talk about the impacts of fossil fuel.
Last year, climate report from the UN was a wake-up call. Unless we completely get off fossil fuels in 11 years, rising sea levels, more frequent storms, and intense heat waves will become the norm. We're already seeing the impacts in Brooklyn. Earlier this year, entire streets in Gowanus were flooded by a regular rainstorm. People were walking waist-deep in toxic water, and parked cars were moved by the currents. I live in Bensonhurst, and I still remember when Caesars Bay was flooded after Hurricane Sandy. There was water and mud and property damage everywhere, and we were the lucky ones. This summer, we had blackouts that left over 30,000 Brooklyn residents without power. During the hottest summer on record, vulnerable New Yorkers were left without air conditioning. According to climate science, this is just the beginning, and the scariest part is that every new report is more pessimistic than the last. As a young person, I'm forced to fight for the future of this planet because of decisions that were made decades before I was born. Fossil fuel corporations have known since the 70s that they were destroying the planet, and Wall Street banks have been propping them up the entire time. The worst part is that they're using our own public money to do it. In 2008, the big banks were bailed out by trillions of taxpayer dollars, and they invested that money right back into the fossil fuel industry. Today, Chase Bank, which is the largest holder of city deposits, is still the biggest investor in fossil fuels in the world. While a tiny group of corporate executives and shareholders made the decision to drown the world in oil, it's poor people and people of color at home and around the world who suffer the harshest consequences. We need to fight for a system where profits are not put over the people. That's why I'm here to urge you to support our campaign to divest from Wall Street and create a public bank. Instead of using our money to destroy the planet, a public bank will allow us to invest our money towards climate solutions. Young people all over the city are excited by this campaign because these are the kinds of radical ideas we need to take back control of our money and our future. Thank you.
Great. Next. And in addition to the fossil fuel industry that these banks bankroll, perhaps the most pressing issue that Brooklyn residents are facing today is that of the housing and the homelessness crisis. And these banks are essentially allowing that crisis to accelerate. If you did not know, the number of people evicted from their homes each day has increased from 4 to 104. So every single day, 104 people are being evicted and displaced to the streets, and these banks are allowing that to happen. Over the last 10 years, the designated banks, which you saw, have provided more than $1 billion in financing for these notorious New York City landlords who are also the worst evictors. The Right to Counsel Coalition also has done a lot of research around this and also held a tribunal, a people's tribunal the other week, setting the record straight on these landlords. And so essentially by placing these deposits in these banks, New York City's public money, which is the money that we all pay in taxes and fines and fees and whatnot, is implicated in harmful projects and practices, both here in the city and throughout the world. So not only do we need to divest from these banks, but we also need to have an alternative public option that we can invest our money in and into our communities. And that public bank absolutely needs to be based on racial, economic, and social and environmental justice, because a public bank is only a good bank as the states, and if it is not accountable to the New Yorkers, then we don't know, what sort of investments that it will make. And now Tausif is going to take us through how that system will actually work.
Thank you for that, Jamie. So based on the potential and the need, really the public bank has an infinite number of possibilities in terms of how it can support communities. But to make it easier, when we talk to people, we boil it down to 4 different issue areas. First, worker justice. So we would support worker and other cooperatives and small businesses that create local living wage jobs with dignity. I think if anyone lives near a main street, everyone should be alarmed by the number of empty storefronts that we're seeing and small businesses that are closing down. 2, financial justice. We want to support fair financial services in redlined communities. So, just think about the difference between walking in the Upper West Side, where anytime you turn a corner, you'll see a Chase or a Bank of America ATM, whereas you can go a long time walking in Brownsville without seeing any kind of banking branch. 3, housing justice. We want to support permanently affordable housing, and that could manifest in many different shapes. And 4, climate justice. We want to support community-controlled renewable energy. So to zoom in on 2 specific examples, first let's talk about how the public bank could support community development credit unions. These are financial institutions which, unlike Wall Street banks, are mission-driven financial cooperatives that provide financial services to redlined communities, like the aforementioned Brownsville. Right now, there are 2 CDCUs that are members of the Public Bank Coalition. One of them is the Brooklyn Cooperative Federal Credit Union, with one branch in Bushwick and another in Crown Heights. And through a financial partnership with the public bank, they could expand their services as well as their reach. They do a lot of good work, but the problem is they need more money in order to serve more people. Second, let's talk about how a public bank could support permanently affordable housing. Community land trusts are a very exciting model that people are talking about, and what they do is they want to take land out of the speculative market and bring it under community control so that community members, like everyone here in the room, for example, could just set the price of housing in that area to keep it permanently affordable. A public bank could help projects like community land trusts by providing low or no interest financing, and the list of projects that we can support goes on. So in terms of what's going on with the Public Bank Coalition, I'm going to leave it up to Julian to tell you a bit more.
Yeah, so to close, and we open with this, the Public Bank Coalition is community powered and is really grounded in community organizing, so we want to close with some of the recent actions that we've undertaken as a coalition. Up here we have our launch down on Wall Street, where we challenged at the seat of financial power what the banks, where their interest lies. Is it in New Yorkers? When we brought folks together to envision what a different future would look like with a public bank. We've also had actions down on the steps of City Hall to challenge the ways that Wall Street banks are financing climate chaos, investing in pipelines, including one that's going through the Rockaways. Our most recent action earlier this year, do folks have folks heard of the New York City Banking Commission? Show of hands. So, the New York City Banking Commission is 3 people, appointees from the Commissioner of Finance, the Mayor, and the Comptroller, and they decide who the designated banks for New York City are. So these 3 people often sit in a room without anyone else present, and they decide who the city is going to bank with. So our recent action brought a bunch of folks, including some folks over here as members of our coalition, to let them know that we're now watching them. We're paying attention to where they're putting our money, and we're asking them to pay more attention to investing in our communities, divesting from these Wall Street banks that are harming New Yorkers and investing in a public bank that could support some of the initiatives that Taos have mentioned. I also want to leave y'all with a couple of upcoming events for the coalition. I think up here we have a flyer there's a fair for worker cooperatives that will be taking place on November 16th at the People's Forum, where we'll be premiering our public bank puppet show that is part of our pop-ed materials to let folks know through community education and sort of a fun format how the city does its banking and how the public bank could support them. And we also have our Manhattan community meeting that'll be happening later on in November at the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union, another member of the coalition. So in closing, not only do we have these events, but we also have a legislative package that'll be coming out very soon. And it will lay the groundwork for the establishment for the public bank. The first bill in this package, sponsored by Councilmember Levine, is expected to drop sometime in the next few weeks, so keep an eye out for that. And we also want to get in touch in particular with the community boards in the room. Again, we want to be out in the communities in particular. You know, I'm a Brooklyn resident, I know Jamie's a Brooklyn resident. We want to go out to folks and let them know about the redlining that's happening, because folks are seeing it, but they may not understand how it relates to them. You know, the financial system is complex and abstract. We want to go out there and talk to folks about how they can engage with it in a meaningful way and how they can organize for change. And so we want to come out to your community boards. We'd love to get your information and see when we can meet up and talk to the folks who live in your respective neighborhoods. So currently, as I mentioned, state law requires that this municipal deposits be held in commercial banks. So right now we are organizing there are multiple different legislative options we have, but right now that is what the coalition is working on, trying to figure out what is the legislative pathway to create this institution. And you know, I think the major barrier is it is a new municipal institution that we're trying to put together.
You mentioned that it's Councilmember Levine is going to be doing that, but that's local, not state, right?
So there are a couple of different ways we're exploring to establish the public bank. Some of them don't require changing state law. There's also a relevant state bill, and we're working with some folks at the state level and seeing how we can use that state bill not only to empower our own movement in New York, but also to open it up so that folks who may want to establish public banks in other municipalities have an easier route to do so.
Any questions?
Teresa Scavo, Community Board 15. You're a registered not-for-profit. Where do your fundings come from?
So I work for a New Economy project. A lot of our funding comes from foundations, foundation funding. Some of the groups in the coalitions are nonprofits, but some of them are grassroots organizations. Some of them are cooperative financial institutions like Brooklyn Cooperative, Brooklyn FCU, and Lower East Side Peoples. So different coalition members have different sort of funding setups. The coalition has received some foundation funding to continue our work as a group.
So all 30 groups that have joined together for this purpose, they're all either a not-for-profit, corporations, community-based organizations. Now, how many people are part of just your part of this?
Our organization is very small. It's a 14-person nonprofit.
14.
Yes, and not all of those people are working on the public bank campaign. Again, we have only a bit of funding for a lot of group work, and for a long time, when we launched the campaign, we actually didn't have any funding for the coalition itself. So a lot of this has been because, as Jamie mentioned, the groups see this as a really powerful way to solve some of the real problems that folks are facing in communities.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ethel Pius with.
Can you bring the, speak into the mic, please, ma'am? Please speak to the mic. It's all right.
I'm Ethel Tias with Community Board 8. I have one question and one suggestion. It sounds like a very good idea. In my neighborhood in central Brooklyn, we're seeing a lot of real estate development where private interests have private funds and they do the development for residential use. So if we can manage a way where the community can be taking the lead in developments of residential units, we can afford to house the low and very low income families that are winding up in shelters, as you mentioned, 104 families a day. So we need to get a handle on that, because at the end of the day, that expense will exceed what we could put into a public bank. And we will have a wave of more private multifamily buildings being abandoned by their landlords based on the new rent regulations. So my question is, how will the public bank be initially financed? If private investors donate, do they get a tax credit? Where is the initial funding to make these loans going to come from?
Thank you for that question. And that's another thing that as a coalition we're still exploring. One suggestion has actually come from Councilmember Cornegie, and he suggested creating a capitalization fund, and every year allocating a small sliver of, our budget as a city is $93 billion. And so you could get, 0.001% of that and put it in a capitalization fund. And over a few years, you would have enough money to capitalize the bank and get it up and running. And that's just one idea. But yeah, our coalition is, again, we're actively doing a lot of legislative research, but also financial research into how this bank can operate fiscally sound.
You have a follow-up question?
Follow-up question. How does this proposed public bank interface with the current not-for-profit fund for the city of New York? Because it seems like the two will overlap substantially. Thank you.
The not-for-profit fund for the city of New York. So there are also a couple of other, at the city and state level, economic development funds that exist to sort of do this type of lending. And that's another thing we're exploring, is how the public bank can supplement those. Again, the power of banking is different than a loan fund. Because it is a bank, that the money that it keeps on reserve, it can leverage, credit unions can leverage $12 for every dollar they have in reserve. So the power of banking is actually much larger than a lot of these loan funds that currently exist. And so not only could the bank do more, but it could also support some of these pre-existing services.
Next question?
Richard Flatteau, Community Board 3. I represent Bedford-Stuyvesant. At this point, does the bank plan on taking deposits from the public?
So currently, the foundation for the campaign is to divest all of the city's public deposits from the Wall Street banks, from the designated banks where they're currently held, and put them in the public bank. So the goal of our campaign is for the bank to hold all of the city's public deposits.
So that means you would not be taking deposits from the public then?
So are you referring to retail, like individual
Public,
accounts?
individuals.
Okay, we're talking public on two levels, the city and individuals.
Sorry about that.
It's all good. So as far as retail banking goes, at the outset in particular, we want the bank to sort of be the city's bank and to sort of finance, permanently affordable housing, economic development projects, community-controlled renewable energy. And the way it would support and help with the redlining problems that Jamie was talking about is by supporting the community development credit unions that are already present in a lot of these communities that need more funding to expand. Over time, we hope that once the bank is established that it can slowly expand into doing retail banking. But at the outset, we want to work with the CDCUs, those community development credit unions, that are also not-for-profit and that are financial cooperatives to support their work.
Any other questions?
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
It's on.
Okay. Christia Winter from Councilmember Farrah Lewis' office. I didn't catch that point you mentioned in regards to Flatbush and the lack of banks. What were the type of banks that you had mentioned?
Sure. And these maps were compiled by our organization, New Economy Project, and so I'd be happy to send them along afterwards. But we do a lot of mapping of where financial services are present and not present in New York City, in particular in communities of color. And so it's a little hard to see here, but we have Flatbush on the left and East New York on the right. And as you can see, if you can see, the blue circles are the bank branches, and the red dots are check cashers. And if you look in Flatbush, there are a couple of bank branches in some of the main commercial corridors, but they're absent from most of the neighborhood. Over here in East New York, there are almost no bank branches present. In both of these neighborhoods, there's, I believe, especially in East New York, there's fewer than one bank branch for every 10,000 residents. And so, we talk about, if folks are familiar with redlining, we talk about it sometimes as something that was in the past, but it's still very present for a lot of New York communities, in particular communities of color in the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn and Southeast Queens. And so this is why we see the public bank as a fundamental issue of racial justice as well as financial justice.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy to send these maps along to anyone who's interested. We have them for every community district in the city.
We have another question.
Yes, I do. It's the
Speak into the mic, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Again, Ethel Tias with CB8. We have the Prospect Heights Historic District. We have the Crown Heights North Historic District. We have Weeksville in District CB8. So we're getting a lot of attention because the area is transportation rich. Mass transit, transportation rich, subways, buses going every which way. You've got a half an hour, 20 minutes, a half an hour to Wall Street. So we're under the gun for for-profit residential developers to come in. What you're proposing seems fine for the private investor and the individual consumer services that are needed for people to be banked in low-income communities. My question remains, though, would you be open to compartmentalizing the services to come out of a public bank because they will affect NYSERS pension recipients across the city, not just the few dots you have on these maps. And as a city retiree, I want to have some comfort knowing that that pension check is going to be coming regularly.
Sure, and as we've currently conceptualized the public bank, it actually doesn't interact with public pension funds. So the city's public deposits are separate from the management of NYSERS, from TRS, from BRS, the police. All the public pension funds are managed separately, and as we've currently conceptualized it, they will continue to be managed separately.
Thank you.
You have a question?
Kim Robinson from Councilmember Alika and P. Samuel's office. And I apologize if this question sounds really stupid. But
No question is stupid. No question is stupid.
what is the difference between public banking and the credit union?
That's a great question.
Right. You knew it was a great question when you was going to ask it, right? You just wanted that response.
And so again, there are many credit unions throughout the city. New York State actually has some of the most credit unions of any state in the country. But credit unions are relatively small. They normally only, you have to be a member of them to utilize their services, and they provide retail banking services. So they're operating normally on a neighborhood scale. What we're talking about, again, is sort of like a banker's bank. So that credit union, say they can only make 100 loans given the amount they have on reserve right now. Once we have the public bank, that bank could lend money to that credit union and allow them to then make 1,000 loans. So increasing their reach, increasing their services, and because they already have the retail setup, they already have the relationships with small businesses and individuals in the communities, they can continue to make those loans but at a larger scale.
Why not just expand and build on those credit unions?
Another great question. So we're actually, our organization, New Economy Project, is working on a state level campaign to do just that. And we see these as working in tandem. As establishing the public bank not only allows us to increase the power of our credit unions, but it allows us to do all of these other things on climate justice, on housing justice, et cetera. So we can do both at the same time, and we actually are encouraging the city and the state to do both at the same time. To expand the power of our credit unions, who do need more lending capacity, and also to establish a public bank to do that and much more.
Any other questions? Thank you, Julian.
Thank you all for having us out here tonight. We appreciate it.
That concludes our business related to public banking, New York City Coalition on the public banking for the public good. At this time, I'd like to ask, do we have members of the Borough Board or their representatives have any unfinished business? Do you have a quorum? You don't, right? Hold on, we're just checking to make sure. I don't believe we do, but I want to make sure. 17, I think 15 or 16. I think it's 18. Okay, so we don't have quorum. So, do we have any unfinished business or new business? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I missed the...
Please speak into the mic.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
Ethel Tias again, CB8. I missed the October meeting. We did have a representative here, but I didn't see on the record that the board, the Borough Board, considered the Safe Staffing Act and moved forward with that. So I know I had to bring it to my Health and Safety Committee.
Right.
And it then went from there to the full board, and we hope to have something to bring to the table in December on that item.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
We'll definitely look into it, and I'll definitely advise the Deputy Brooklyn Borough President of your concern, okay? Any other unfinished business? New business? You have a question as well? New business?
Hi. Julio Peña, Community Board 7. I know we don't have quorum, but I just wanted to mention CB7 just started a pretty massive ULURP process for a private rezoning on our waterfront for Industry City. And I just wanted to make the Borough Board aware that it is a very large, probably one of the largest private rezoning in the city. Right now, we're having a public speak out for the community, one of several. So I encourage Brooklyn residents to participate in public forums that we'll be hosting in the coming weeks before the 60-day window before CB7 votes. And then it goes to the Brooklyn Board and the Board President to issue a vote. So I encourage people to participate. Sorry? They're meeting currently at Sunset Park High School, which is 135 35th Street. We don't have a date yet for the next public hearing or for the next meeting, but CB7 will be announcing it shortly.
Okay. We also have an announcement as well, Serena Purcell.
Good evening. So next week, Wednesday, the 13th, there's a flyer up front for the Youth Civil Congress. I hope everyone gets it, especially community boards. We want to empower the youth to apply for the community boards. So we'll be sending an invite out to all the community boards to share with, if you have any youths that are appointed to the community board, to ask them to come out and table for next week, Wednesday. So an email will be going out tomorrow, and you want to make sure that if you have anyone that's probably youth on the community board to come out and table on behalf of your particular community boards, right? So that event is next week, Wednesday, 3 to 7, Brooklyn Borough Hall. They're going to be having civil discussions, understand the role of becoming a member of the community board, knowing that the age now is 16. And we also want to make sure that we encourage our young people to sign up and become members of the community boards. We do have a few, but we do not have enough, okay? And make sure you grab the flyer up front. Any questions? There's a business card for Brianna Shug, who is in charge of the event, and she's the one that's going to take care of the vendors, anyone that want a table for the event. Thank you.
Yep, and it's Brianna Suggs, just so that you know. All right? So our next meeting will be Wednesday, December the 3rd at 6. Oh, I'm sorry. And then you're right, it is Tuesday. Thank you for the clarification. All right, I got it. Yeah, but that wasn't step after.